Hello, everyone! Uniforms in every sport are the way we identify with a team, whether it's the latest kits, years of tradition, shows our renegade side, or you smell bad. MLB teams over the years have shown the best and worst they have to offer, whether it's on the field or in the dressing room, and that's what we're taking a look at today. This is every MLB team's worst uniform. Now, for this list criteria, holiday jerseys such as Memorial Day, Independence Day, Canada Day, and Labor Day don't count because stuff like camo and the American flag and even pastel blue and pink from Mother's and Father's Days never match most teams' color schemes, so that's not fair. And I'm also not counting spring training uniforms. However, player weekend jerseys do count because there's usually no clashing colors on those. And I'm only doing ones from after 1961 when the first Washington Senators moved to Minnesota to become the Twins. And plus, that's when more modern designs and logos start popping up, such as the LA Dodgers logo. And lastly, and this is the most important part, I'd like to emphasize that this is strictly opinion based. So with that being said, let's get started.
Chicago Cubs, 1978 to 1981 road uniforms. The Cubs, for the most part, have had pretty good uniforms in their history. However, their jump on the powder blue bandwagon for their road uniform was a bit of a blemish. And on top of that, this one even featured pinstripes. I'm not the biggest fan of powder blue jerseys to begin with some exceptions, but the addition of pinstripes makes this look like pajamas. St. Louis Cardinals, 1992 to present, road uniforms with navy blue cap. Just like the Cubs, the Cardinals have generally had some pretty solid uniforms, so this may come off as nitpicking to some. However, I always thought that their road uniform with the navy blue hat looked depressing. The jersey and the hat by themselves are alright. The problem is when you put them together. Compared to their home uniform, it looks like the color's been sucked out of them. Nowadays, since the 2013 season, the Cardinals wear their red hats on the road and save the navy blue hat when the home team they're playing is sporting red hats like Cincinnati, Philadelphia, or Washington. Amazing how swapping the blue hat with the red one magically brightens this uniform up. Milwaukee Brewers, 2010's gold uniforms. Up until the Vegas Golden Knights gold alternate, gold uniforms have been nothing but a disaster, and the Brewers continued such tragedy. With the gold being as flat as it is, it looks like Dijon mustard or even a bad case of diarrhea. But not only did they have a standard gold jersey, but they even did a Spanish version. Why? Is that the best way to give back to Milwaukee's Hispanic community? Thankfully, after the 2015 season, these were scrapped for a navy alternate that said Milwaukee, matched with the old glove logo, lasting until Nike overhauled their uniforms for the 2020 season. Cincinnati Reds, late 90s, early 2000s, black-sleeved home and road uniforms. Look, I get it. The Reds' tertiary color is black, and adding black or emphasizing black was the thing to do in sports at the time thanks to the White Sox pioneering it in 1991. However, when I think of the Cincinnati Reds, I do think of one thing, and that's the color red, not black. Maybe it was symbolism for how dark the franchise's days were at the time, like winning 96 games in 1999 and losing a tiebreaker game to the Mets for that wildcard spot. And how can we forget when Marge Schott owned you before getting banned from MLB? Yeah, it was pretty bad for Cincy during that time. At least you had Ken Griffey Jr. playing for you. Now, the Reds emphasizing more black than red reaches an irony when it comes to our next entry. Pittsburgh Pirates, 2007 red uniforms. So, you know how the actual pirate logo that the Pirates have sports a red bandana? Well, I guess that was more than enough reason for this. Now, this wasn't the first time the Pirates tried to inject red into their perfect color scheme of black and yellow. Their black alternates that they would wear at Three Rivers featured red hatbills. Heck, their turn-ahead the clock uniforms were even red. However, it was 2007, and the Pirates' uniforms were sleeveless vests. And this is what they came up with. Needless to say, it's already a death sentence when these alternates only lasted a year. Red and black is a good combination, but throwing the Pirates' yellow into the mix screws the whole thing up. Look, guys, Keep the red on those Pittsburgh Crawford throwbacks you like to wear sometimes, because these are just plain ugly. New York Mets, 1998 to 2011, black uniforms and hats. The fact that these lasted as long as they did is astonishing, and last year they even made a comeback because we're getting 2000s nostalgia now. Makes me feel old. Granted, I'm not a Mets fan, so I'm more likely to not be into these, but these things were an eyesore. The Mets were pretty dedicated to forcing black into their color scheme of Dodger blue and giant orange, as if to show they are the Yankees' arch nemesis. And that's exactly how this feels. Forced. Now, in terms of that hat, it'd be one thing if it was only worn with their black or road uniforms, but this thing throughout 14 seasons was worn more than their classic blue hat with the orange logo. They only woke up and realized that was the one they should be wearing in 2012 for their 50th anniversary. Mets gonna Met. Philadelphia Phillies, 1979 Saturday Night Special all burgundy uniforms. In 1979, the Phillies rolled out these burgundy uniforms in what they dubbed a Saturday Night Special for all the fans at Veterans Stadium. That night, they would lose to the Montreal Expos 10-6 and never wore them again. However, 40 years later, in 2019, the Phillies dusted these uniforms off and brought them back, only to be spanked by the Atlanta Braves 15-7. The overabundance of burgundy already puts those all-red Indians uniforms to shame, but to be cursed on top of all that? Now that's a recipe for disaster. At least the Phillies' current red alternates sport the appropriate home and away pants, and to think a little change like that could have saved these. Washington Nationals, 2005 to 2008 road uniforms. The Expos' move to DC was the devastating climax to Montreal, to say the least, after the Montreal screwjob of 1994 to Jeffrey Loria owning the team on top of only making the playoffs once in all their seasons in Montreal. And to top it off, when the now Nationals would go on the road, they just looked sad. The Cardinals road uniforms from earlier I thought looked depressing. This here makes those look all bright and colorful by comparison. It's as if Majestic hired an emo kid and they came up with this. I get that navy blue is in their color scheme, but with no red to even balance it out with the gray, it just makes this look washed out and sad. Sad. But in that respect, these uniforms perfectly matched the Nationals' on-field product at the time, and only uniforms as depressing as these would be what gave Barry Bonds the home run record. Miami Marlins, 2012 to 2018 home uniforms. The Marlins' first uniform change, and thus rebrand from Florida to Miami, was rough thanks to Jeffrey Loria being the sleazeball that he is. Marlins Park. However, while these uniforms look different from other unis across the league, different doesn't always mean good. First of all, most M logos on hats end up huge and comical, and this logo is no different. Second, it only sports the city name, Miami. Only the orange jersey from this time said Marlins. All the other jerseys they wore said Miami. If you ask me, leave the city name for the road jersey. And last, the font doesn't even fit an MLB team, at least in my eyes. Maybe an independent team at best. Thankfully, the Marlins' current uniforms are a step up from this drivel, even if the home whites still say Miami. Atlanta Braves, 1980 to 1986 road uniforms. Like the Cubs and Cardinals, the Braves are one of those teams that have had perfect uniforms throughout their history, which, yes, includes those Hank Aaron era uniforms. So I feel like I'm nitpicking with this one. I've already established that I'm not the biggest fan of powder blue uniforms, for the most part, but could the Braves make their attempt any less plain? You've still got Atlanta in the familiar font that the team still uses to this day, but this uniform is begging for a little red thrown in the mix. Without any red, you'd think this was a Blue Jays or Royals uniform from that time. San Francisco Giants, City Connect uniforms. If you didn't know already, Nike has been doing city jerseys for the NBA ever since they took over the NBA license in the 2017-2018 season. Last season, they decided to bring that idea to MLB, and it's been a hit for the most part. Unfortunately, this is not a hit. Side note, one thing on Nike uniforms I hate across all teams is slapping the Nike logo on the front rather than putting it on the sleeve as Russell and Majestic did before, and maybe we'll touch on that subject some other day. These things can be anything you want. And what did you choose, San Fran? You chose dull and unimaginative. I can understand Nike not wanting to put something like the Bay across the chest, because God knows they slap that on Warriors jerseys all day. However, why is the Golden Gate Bridge only on the sleeves? Put that across the chest! I'm sure Nike could have made it look cool. And what's with this fade effect on all the orange bits? Is that mist rising from the Pacific Ocean, or is that supposed to be the stench of all the homeless people scattered across San Francisco? Either way, this sucks. Plain and simple. Los Angeles Dodgers 2019 Players Weekend Uniforms. Okay, while all of the white 2019 Players Weekend uniforms were trash, the Dodgers themselves don't have many other uniforms in their history. I mean, there's their home uniform, both of their road uniforms, and oh, that one time they had a blue one in 1999. Yeah, they've been fairly conservative, to say the least, with a City Connect jersey thrown in. Anyways, this look as well as all the other white Players Weekend jerseys from that year, who exactly were these made for? Early 2000s rappers? I don't know who at Majestic thought white text on a white background was a good idea, but I hope someone smacked them upside the head for it. Sure, the names and numbers are outlined, but it's still hard to see. What a major letdown from the colorful Players Weekend jerseys from years prior. Arizona Diamondbacks 2016 to 2019 home and road primary uniforms. While I find the Diamondbacks 2016 redesign unnecessary, I gotta say they almost got it right. But much like life, almost doesn't count. Now on their red and black uniforms, it's less egregious but still noticeable. On their main home and road uniforms, the shoulders feature a fade effect as well as on their hats. It's patterned like a snake cause, well, duh. However, it always bothered me how the fade happens on the sleeves but not on the front or back, creating an unsightly cut that makes you ask why even bother. Thankfully, Nike solved this issue in 2020 by just omitting the fade effect altogether. That was easy. Colorado Rockies turn ahead the clock uniforms. Ah yes, turn ahead the clock. The idea of, this is what uniforms will be like in the future. Well, for better or for worse, over 20 years after this, they still don't. I'm going to be honest, it was a close one between this and that time they wore their black vest with purple sleeves. Their road uniform with pinstripes was also close, but afterwards they kept that style but just omitted the pinstripes. Though, the thought of having a giant version of the logo with the number on the front sounds more fitting for basketball than it does baseball. Maybe it's a good thing this idea never caught on. It's mostly uneventful otherwise, much like the Rockies' team history. San Diego Padres, 2017 to 2019 home uniforms. Now you're probably expecting their brown and yellow uniforms, whether we're talking about their originals, the various alternates they've had over the years, or even their current uniforms. Heck, maybe even the random rainbow that is their City Connect uniforms. No. Because at least all of those are memorable despite the color combinations. These, however, are so dreadfully boring. Okay, so when the Padres first moved into Petco Park in 2004, they debuted new uniforms in navy blue and white with even a sand-colored road uniform. The team name, letters, and numbers all had a unique font. The sandy road uniform would become gray in 2011, and the unique font for the letters and numbers on the back of the jerseys became a block font in 2012. Then for the 2016 season, they were hosting the All-Star Game and decided to add yellow back to their color scheme and have their SD logo be placed on the left side of the home uniforms, and they were cool, injecting some modern Padres uniforms with some old Padres design. But for 2017, we got the most unimaginative uniforms ever! I may have criticized the Diamondbacks uniforms, but at least I can give Majestic points for being creative. These are far from creative. There is absolutely nothing interesting at all about these. It'd be one thing if this was an older design that's been unchanged for decades like the Dodgers or Yankees, but this design came out in 2017, and that's just unacceptable. Chicago White Sox, 1976 to 1979 home and road uniforms. Believe it or not, these were the uniforms the Sox were donning during Tony La Russa's first stint with the team, at least initially. Anyways, these uniforms are often called not just one of the worst MLB uniforms of all time, but one of the worst uniforms in all of sports. It's not hard to see why. While I do appreciate how this kind of homages the Negro League's Chicago American Giants, albeit minus the pinstripes, everything else about this just screams wrong. I am not a fan of how the home uniform doesn't even have the team name on it, just Chicago. Second, I don't think I've seen polo shirts or even soccer jerseys with collars as big as these. And third, there was even an option to wear shorts. Shorts. While playing baseball. Can you even imagine sliding feet first wearing shorts? I remember reading an article, can't remember the source off the top of my head, but when the Sox wore these as throwbacks in 2015, the author compared them to beer league uniforms, and I agree. No wonder Chris Sale refused to wear these and cut them up. Minnesota Twins, 1987 to 2009 road uniform. If you ask me, pinstripes belong on white uniforms and only white uniforms. They give a sense of command, luxury, and even high status. And thus, putting pinstripes on a road uniform sounds like the douchiest thing you could do. But I hate the Twins, so I guess I was going to say that regardless. I know, I'm biased. The font used for the jersey letters and numbers is nothing to write home about, though I always liked how they kept the M hat for this uniform even after the home uniform switched to having the TC hat. Other than that, me despising gray uniforms with pinstripes started here. Thank goodness they got rid of the pinstripes in 2010, and oddly the white uniform lost them in 2015. Detroit Tigers, 2017 Players Weekend uniforms. Much like the Dodgers, the Tigers haven't had many uniforms over the years, let alone uniform changes. So, like the Dodgers, I'm resorting to Players Weekend uniforms. Sure, I could go after that alternate blue jersey they wore once in 1995, but that's a good jersey, and I wish Detroit brings it back someday. However, unlike the Dodgers, where their god-awful Players Weekend uniform also applied to all the other ones from that year, the Tigers' Players Weekend uniform came from a year where the Players Weekend uniforms were fairly colorful and appealing, and yet the Tigers decided to go with mostly gray. I know they were on the road that weekend, but maybe, just maybe instead of only orange on the sleeves, you could have had the whole jersey be orange? You're already wearing orange hats with this, so why not? Just felt like a missed opportunity. I understand you're on the road, but come on. It just could have been done better. Cleveland Guardians, 2019 to present road alternate uniforms. When the Indians changed their uniforms in 1994 for their first season at Jacobs Field, now Progressive Field, they also ushered in a navy blue alternate that they could wear at both home and on the road. This is a uniform that you may have seen quite a lot of in all three of their World Series appearances since 1995. However, when the Tribe hosted the All-Star Game in 2019, the navy blue jersey with Indians on it got swapped with a red alternate, and the navy blue jersey got Cleveland slapped on it, making it strictly a road jersey. Now, I do like the red alternate. I'm even glad it wasn't just a uniform for the All-Star Game year like the Mets orange jerseys or the Padres 2016 jerseys. Anyways, maybe it was part of Dolan's decision to ease out the name Indians. I don't know, but they messed up the navy blue jersey. Yeah, just slap the city name on there in the plainest block text imaginable. That's real creative, because that's the progressive thing to do. Get rid of the native, but keep the land. Wait a minute. Kansas City Royals, early 2000s black alternate uniforms. Another organization in the late 90s and early 2000s that thought they could integrate black into their color scheme, and it flopped. One could say it was symbolism for how this was the dark days of the Royals organization. Honestly, this resembles a knockoff jersey in the wrong colors that you'd find on eBay, and honestly, since this, the Royals have been best not having black in their color scheme. I'm also just glad that this trend of forcing black has died. Thank God. New York Yankees, 2019 Players Weekend uniforms. Ironically, the Yankees wore these on Players Weekend when they played the all-white Dodgers. I'll give Majestic this. The black versions, and thus these Yankees jerseys, are a bit better than the white versions, but that's like saying you prefer the dog taking a dump in the backyard rather than the front yard. Dull mess either way. As for the uniform itself, I guess it'd be fine if you were planning to rob a bank or a store so you're less likely to be detected. Besides that, 2019's Players Weekend was just one big flop, much like your dad's belly flopping into the pool, and thus was replaced by City Connect. Speaking of, Boston Red Sox City Connect uniforms. These uniforms are meant for Patriots Day and are based on the Boston Marathon. I understand the context, and I'm glad they allowed the Red Sox to wear their white pants instead of making them wear yellow pants to match the shirts. However, this comes off as something a minor league team would do, akin to something like Star Wars Night, Nickelodeon Night, or even tuxedo uniforms. And on top of all that, we've finally done it. The Red Sox are donning UCLA colors. UCLA is a B logo for Bruins that's essentially the same as the Red Sox, and the Red Sox share Nissan with another Bruins. Those connections had to have been intentional. Lastly, with many other City Connect jerseys having city nicknames or abbreviations of their cities, it's kind of a letdown that this only says Boston. Boston has many nicknames, and yet they decide not to take advantage of it. Imagine how mad Yankees fans would be if it said Titletown on these. Tampa Bay Rays Road Fauxback uniforms. From 1998 to 2007, the Devil Rays merely existed and had decent uniforms to boot, but starting in 2008, they dropped Devil from the name and became good. Now, the Rays had donned various throwbacks of local minor league teams. The St. Petersburg Pelicans certainly comes to mind, but then they made an interesting decision in 2014. Make faux backs, that's fake throwbacks by the way, based on the Padres look from the 70s and 80s. Now, the navy blue version of this is okay, but the powder blue version not so much. This style of Padres jersey, while I mentioned was memorable, was still ugly, and the Rays version doesn't make it any less ugly. I guess the Rays would have worn powder blue on the road if they existed in the 80s, but it's still a color I'm not the biggest fan of, and the addition of yellow sleeves doesn't help this jersey's ugliness. Toronto Blue Jays 2004 to 2011 uniforms. These uniforms' goal was to appeal to younger people and bring down the average age of Blue Jays fans, and it failed. Nowadays, these are not well loved by Blue Jays fans, and it's not hard to see why. Despite being the Blue Jays, there sure is a whole lot more black and graphite than, blue. These came out before it was announced the Expos were leaving Montreal and thus making the Blue Jays the only Canadian team, and it's insane that Canada's only team didn't feature the maple leaf. A common criticism from fans. Yeah, they put the leaf on the sleeves, but it's not integrated into the main logo. No wonder the Blue Jays never went anywhere during this time. Baltimore Orioles 2018 Braille uniforms. Here is a story of desperation. 2018 was a turning point for the Orioles as they hit rock bottom. Chris Davis was struggling, and he was a year away from showing the world that he couldn't hit anymore. Manny Machado was traded to the Dodgers in the middle of the season, and they had to do anything to get butts in seats. The purpose of Braille is for blind people to read because, they can't read. So when you put it on a uniform, it just looks utterly ridiculous. I believe this is the only instance where Braille was used to spell out a team name, and it's no wonder it never caught on. But hey, that's what happens when you're desperate to fill your park like the Orioles were. Texas Rangers 2009 to 2019 home uniforms. This is the reason why I don't like the city, or state in this case, being on the home jersey, at least when it comes to baseball. City Connect jerseys notwithstanding. Before this, the home uniform said Rangers on them, with Texas being reserved for the road and any alternates. Maybe just the T in some cases. But when they brought back red hats and uniforms in 2009, the team name went away, and suddenly all of their uniforms only said Texas. Why? To establish they are Texas's team? I guess, but I don't know. Thankfully, Nike brought Rangers back to home white jerseys in 2020, in old school cursive nonetheless. Houston Astros, City Connect uniforms. The most positive thing I can say is that I like Space City on the front. Unfortunately, these are a bit underwhelming. The Astros regular blue jersey sports the classic rainbow guts that old Astros jerseys had. This one seems to try and make that effect more in the style of energy glow rather than looking like a rainbow, and it sounds like a cool idea, except it's only in the piping. Sure, it's also in the socks, but not everyone in baseball likes to show their socks off. In addition, that regular blue jersey has white pants paired with it, and this is one of those jerseys that doesn't look right in matching navy blue pants. I dig how the sleeves sport a grid outline, but it's so subtle you won't even notice, so what's the point? Much like the Giant City Connect jerseys, the creativity was limitless, and Nike still phoned it in. Oakland Athletics, 1969 to 1971 yellow road uniforms. No, this is not the Green Bay Packers. Sure, both Oakland and Green Bay share an identical color scheme, but only something like this could have existed in the 60s leading into the 70s. Its bright colors make this uniform look cartoonish even though those were the shades the A's had at the time. I don't understand why the 1969 home uniforms said A's but the road jerseys just had the A. Furthermore, what's with the giant MLB logo on the front underneath the A? It looks silly to me. Fortunately, this uniform was modified in 1970 to have the apostrophe S with the A, in addition to removing the MLB logo on the front, until the A's decided on new uniforms for the 1972 season. But despite all the changes, it remained an eyesore even when Oakland brought them back for throwback days. Los Angeles Angels, 1997 to 2001 uniforms. In the 90s, Disney wanted to make their mark in sports ownership, which included having an NHL team that would become the Anaheim Mighty Ducks, as well as purchasing the then California Angels. Disney already had Disneyland in Anaheim, so why not have two more attractions in the city in the form of two sports teams? Disney would buy the Angels in 1997 and wanted to make their mark as they did with the Ducks, on top of changing the team name to Anaheim and renovating Angel Stadium after the Rams moved to St. Louis. Now, while I've met people who are nostalgic for at least the hat, these have always looked butt ugly to me. Both uniforms feature pinstripes, but the dominance of the navy blue and its placement make the home and road jerseys look incredibly drab, and they especially look drab in comparison to the uniforms they've had since 2002. Thank God those were the uniforms they won the World Series in. Seattle Mariners, turn ahead the clock uniforms. Last and for many least, the Mariners. Now, some of these turn-ahead-the-clock uniforms featured the corresponding team colors like the Rockies and Pirates, while others like the Mariners and Mets used different color schemes. It's been over 20 years and the Mariners are still navy blue and green. Interesting how the hat and jersey sport their compass logo, but the Mariners themselves just look off in burgundy and black. The compass is so big that part of it gets tucked in with the rest of the jersey. And not gonna lie, but this should have been one of those turn-ahead-the-clock jerseys that omitted numbers on the front. It just has an aura of beer league softball on a Saturday night, which isn't a bad thing, though the Mariners would have fared better in beer league these past 21 years. And silver helmets with the numbers on the front and the logo on the side, no, just no. You're not a football team. This was the peak of how far you could push for a futuristic uniform, and aside from one night where the Mariners and Royals donned these things again, I'm glad the idea never stuck.
Well, that does it for the worst MLB uniforms, at least in my eyes. If there's a uniform you don't like that didn't make the list, or if you think one on the list isn't bad, go ahead and leave a comment. I encourage it. Anyways, see you later.